Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how you can read and write data. So we can write data to a file using the printWriter class, and we can then read it back using scanner, which we've used previously. So let's get started. I've created a new project in Eclipse called readWrite, and we're going to create a new class, and this class is going to be called writeData. And we will have a main method. Alright, so the first thing here is we're writing to a file. How do we do this? Well, we're going to change things up a little bit. Here's our regular main method, and what we're going to do is add a little bit onto this. We're going to say it throws an exception. This is because when we're doing file input and output in Java, there's a possibility that an exception could occur. For example, if we're trying to read from a file that doesn't exist, or we're trying to write to a file that we don't have permission to write to, things can go wrong. So the Java I/O libraries throw exceptions. Now, if this was a more complicated program, we'd catch the exception and do some error handling. But for now, in this video, we're just going to throw an exception and not worry about it. So, the first thing we need to do when we are going to write to this file is make sure the file doesn't already exist. Now, to do this, we're going to create a file object. So java.io, because all the file stuff lives inside the IO package. The alternative would be to import java.io.star, but we're not going to do that today. .file, and we'll call this file equals new java.io.file, and the file that we're going to write to is called scores.txt. So this creates a file object, which is an abstraction for a file on our file system. So what we can do now is ask the file, do you even exist already? So if file.exists, if the file already exists, we're going to print out an error and exit, because we don't want to overwrite the file. So system.out.println file already exists. And again, we're going to system.exit 0. Okay, so we've made sure the file doesn't exist. How do we write to the file, a new file now? Well, to do this, we use the class called printWriter. printWriter is a class that sits on top of output streams and allows us to print line by line, which is really nice to use when we're writing text files. So java.io.printWriter, and we'll call this output equals new java.io.printWriter, and the argument to the constructor is just going to be our file, so that the printWriter knows what file we're going to write to. So now we can use all the methods of output to print data to this file. So output, for example, output dot, we've got append, format, we've got print, a whole bunch of prints and a whole bunch of print lines, and also printf for formatted text. So we're going to use the print method for now. So print, and we're going to print out a name. And let's just make up a name. So it's going to be John T. Smith, and a space at the end. So we've printed out John T. Smith to the file, and now what we're going to do is print out a score. So we're going to use println output.println, and we'll print out the number 90. So now we'll print out another name, so out.print, and we'll call this Eric K. Jones. Output.println, and we'll print out 85. And I forgot to put output here. So we've written some text to the file now. The important thing we have to do next is to close the file. So output.close. Close the file so that we can continue. So now let's see if this works. So I'm just going to unmaximize this for now. Let's run as Java application. We didn't get any output because we didn't do any console output. We only printed out to the file. Now, if I press refresh here, you can see that scores.txt now exists. And if we look inside it, Eric T. Smith, 90, Eric K. Jones, 85. Now, the reason this printed out on its own line is because I accidentally used print line instead of print. But that's not a problem. We've got our text written. Now, if we try and run this again, you can see we've got this error that the file already exists. So this is definitely working. If we delete this file, yes, and then run again, hit F5 to refresh, scores is back, and it looks correct now because we fixed that print line mistake. So that's how we can write text to a file using print writer. Now, how do we read this back? Well, what we're going to do is create another class, and I'm going to call this read data, and we'll have a main method. So we can read this data back using scanner. So remember, we use scanner all the time to read data from the keyboard, but scanner can also be used to read from files as well. So what we're going to do here is import scanner, util.scanner. Alright, so in our main method for read data, we're going to create another file. So java.io.file. And we'll call it, we're going to open the file, scores.txt, which is the file we just wrote. Again, we're going to modify our main method to throw an exception. Alright, so we've created our file object, so now we can create our scanner object. So scanner input equals new scanner. Now instead of giving it system.in as a parameter, we just pass in our file, which means that the scanner is going to read from the file that we specify instead. So what we're going to do next is have a while loop. While there is more input to read, so has next, we're going to read in. So the first thing we're going to do is declare a string called first name equals input dot next. So we're reading our first string separated by spaces. So string middle initial equals input dot next. String last name equals input dot next. And I've spelled input wrong up here. So next we're going to read the score, and we can set this to an int because we can use the next int method of scanner. So input dot next int. Alright, so now what we're going to do is print all this out. So system dot out dot println first name concatenated with a space plus middle initial space last name. I'll just maximize this so we've got a bit more room, plus space plus score. Alright, so that's the end of our while loop. Now the last thing we have to do again is close our file, so input.close. And we're ready to go. So let's try and run read data now, which will read back from the file that we've previously written to. Plus score, well, that's my fault. This was supposed to be a space, not a string. Let's try that again. Alright, so the data it read back was exactly what existed inside our file, which means this is working correctly. So if we look inside scores, it's just reading back the data that was in the file. So if I put another entry into here, so Michael R. Mana, and of course I got 100. If we run this again, we get all of the data from our file. So this is working fantastically. We can read data using scanner, and we can write data using the print writer class. So just to summarize, Print writer contains methods for writing text to a file, for example, print and print line. We can read from a file using scanner just like we read from system.in. We first create a file object to pass to scanner's constructor instead of using system.in. So with that, that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.